Sponsored by Rabbi Shlomi and Mirla Greenwald. This is a Sicha from Likutei Sichos, Chelek Parshas Vayelech Sicha Beis, and the topic of the Sicha is that in this week's Parsha we learn the pasuk of Likutei Sefer HaTorah Hazeh v'samtem oisei mitzad arein gomer v'hoya sham b'chol ha'ed, and we learn the Rashi on this pasuk. And there are 5 parts on the Sicha. The Rebbe will, number 1, present an explanation that's given of what Rashi is saying and ask 4 questions on that explanation, and as a result reject that explanation. Number 2, present a new explanation of what Rashi is saying. Number 3, ask 2 questions on this new explanation. Number 4, answer the 2 questions. And number 5, present the Yenish al Torah in Rashi. On the pasuk in our parsha, where it says, after Vayetzav Moshe es Levim Gomer, and Moshe commanded the Levim, and he said to them, Lokayach es Sefer HaTorah Hazeh, take this Sefer Torah, v'samtem oisei mitzad arein Gomer, and put it beside the Aron, v'hoya sham b'chol ha'ed, and it should be there as an aid, as a witness, as testimony. So Rashi quotes the word Lokayach from the pasuk, and he explains, Kamay, it's like Zachar, Shamar, Halech. It's like these words of Zachar, Shamar, and Halech. So to here we have the word Lokayach. So in terms of understanding what Rashi is saying over here, so there are Mefarshim, like the Re'im among others, who explain that the intent of Rashi over here is to teach that Lokayach isn't a tzivui, but is rather Loshen Hoive, meaning that just like by Zachar and Shomer, etc., the Schira over there and the Shmira has to be constant, so too here, Lokayach is Loshen Hoive. So what does that mean in terms of understanding our pasuk? So this is a quote from the Re'im, that Aleichem Lakachas a Sefer HaTorah Hazeh, that it's upon you to take this Sefer Torah, Losem Oisem Mitzad Ha'aron, and to place it beside the Aron. And here are the key words, Liyos L'chol Le'ed, that it should be for you as an aid when? Kol Hayamim, all of the days. So what's understood from this teaching of the Re'im is that Rashi is coming to explain the reason why Lokayach is not written as a tzivui, as a command. Why doesn't it say tikhu? Why does it say Lokayach, which is Loshen Hoive? And the answer is, it's in order to teach us that it has to be a constant thing. It has to be Liyos L'chol Ha'ed, when? Kol Hayamim, all of the days. So Rashi is coming to tell us the reason why it's not written as a tzivui, but is rather written as Loshen Hoive, because it has to be a constant thing. However, there are 4 questions that the Rebbe asks on this explanation, which as a result, the Rebbe then presents a different explanation of what Rashi is telling us. The first question is, according to this, the main thing is missing. The main thing is missing in Rashi, because Rashi should have explained that by saying Lokayach in Loshen Hoive, it means to emphasize that it should be there Kol Hayamim, like Rashi indeed does by Zachar. When it says Zachar in the pasuk, Zachar Sayem Azeh, so Rashi says Limed, it teaches us Shemaskirin Yitzias Mitzrayim B'chol Yom, that we mention Yitzias Mitzrayim every day. So also here Rashi should have said Lokayach Limed, that it has to be there Kol Hayamim. The second question is, at the very least, if Rashi is not going to say limid, that it teaches us that it has to be there Kol Hayamim, at the very least, Rashi should have said Lokoyach Loshen Hoive, that it's written Loshen Hoive and not Loshen Tzivui, because that's what he's coming to explain. It's Loshen Hoive like these other places, and not Loshen Tzivui. The third question is, according to this, the order of Zachar, Shomer, and Halech are not understood, because Rashi should have first said Halech, which is said in Parshas Noach about the waters, that there were Halech. It says twice about the waters, about the movement of the waters. So it should have said first Halech, which is in Parshas Nayach, before Zachar and Shomer, which are said afterwards in the later Parshas. And the fourth question is, in general, you can't say Lashon Hoive about taking, because taking happens once. You could only say Lashon Hoive about the placing, that it should be Lashon Hoive placed over there, Kol Hayomim. So Lashon Hoive doesn't even fit with the act of taking. And because of these four questions, the Rebbe is going to present a different way of understanding what Rashi is teaching. So moving on now to what Rashi is teaching us here. So from all of this is understood that the intent of Rashi is not to explain the reason it says L'koyach and Lashon Hoive, that it should be a constant thing. That's not what Rashi is telling us here. But rather, the intent of Rashi over here is to prove that even though L'koyach isn't said in a Lashon of a Pu'ula, of an action, and the Lashon of a Tzivui, and of a command, so that would be, let's say, Tikhu, command the Leviim that Tikhu, that they should take, but rather, so even though it's not said in that form, but rather in a Lashon of the actual act of taking, which is called the Makar. In English it's called the infinitive. So let's say the act of seeing is to see, the act of walking is to walk. We're not talking about it in the context of actually happening, but just the word itself, the verb itself, the way it's removed from being actually done. So Rashi is telling us over here, the intent of Rashi is to tell us and to prove that even though L'koyach isn't said in a Lashon of a Pu'ula and Tzivui, but rather in a Lashon of the actual act of taking, the Makar, which means it's removed from actually being done. Nevertheless, here it means a Tzivui. So that's what Rashi is telling us, that even though it's used in the Lashon Makar, in the infinitive, it still means a Tzivui. And that's why Rashi brings the proofs from Zachar, Shomer, and Holech, that they too are the makar of the word. Zachar is the infinitive of remembering, Shomer of guarding, and Holech of going, and yet they are used in those cases as a tzivui. And according to this, it's now understood why Rashi brings the proof from the word Holech after he brings the proof from the word Zachar and Shomer. Because the intent of Rashi over here is to bring a proof from the word Halech, not the way it's in Parshas Noach that talks about the waters going down, which is just a description of the waters receding. He's rather referring to the word Halech that's written after Zachar and Shomer, where it's written as a tzivui, as a command. It says it once Halech v'dibarta, it says Halech v'karasa, where that Lashon Halech is being said as a command, and it's using the Lashon Makar. And that Halech comes after Zachar and Shomer, because Zachar appears in Sefer Shmos, Shomer in Sefer Dvarim, and Halech, in the context of being a tzivui, is said only in the Nevi'im. And there are two questions here. The first question is, why does Rashi need to bring three proofs that also a tzivui can be said in the lashon of the makar, and it doesn't suffice with one or two of the proofs? And as we'll see in the answer, there are two parts of this question. If Rashi were to bring two proofs, then the question would be, why does Rashi need to bring two proofs? And he doesn't suffice with one of them. And the answer would basically be to show how each of the proofs has a weakness. However, when it comes to bringing three proofs, there are two parts to the task. First, we have to show the weakness of each of the proofs separately. But even then, it's not enough of an answer, because it should be then sufficient to just bring two proofs. Each one has a weakness, so each one counteracts the weakness in the other. We have to also explain, after explaining the weakness in each of them separately, we need to show how any two of them combined also have a weakness that the third one doesn't have. And then it'll be understood why all three are needed, because each two combined have a weakness that the third one doesn't have, and therefore that third one is brought. And then when we combine that third one with either of the first two, we'll see that they also share a weakness that the one remaining doesn't have, and that's why all of them are needed. So that's the first question. Why does Rashi need to bring three proofs, and he doesn't suffice with just bringing one or two of the proofs? And the second question is, since Zachar and Shomer were already said in the Torah before this pasuk, it was said a number of times, and it was said as a tzivui, So then Rashi should have over there explained that even though it says Zachar and Shomer using the lashon of the Makar, still the intent is a tzivui. Rashi should explain it over there. And if in those psukim it's so clear to Rashi that it means a tzivui, even though it says in the lashon of a Makar, it's meant as a tzivui, and it's so clear to him to the extent that Rashi doesn't have to even explain it. So then why over here in our pasuk does Rashi have to explain it? So either also explain it by Zachar and Shomer, or don't explain it either over here. So we're going to move straight into the answer, and we're going to begin by presenting the main point of the answer and answering question number 2. So the explanation of this is as follows. The meaning of lashon makar negates being an action. Like, for example, the word over here, lokoyach. It means to take the way it's removed from the act of the actual taking. And the distance between lashon makar and lashon pa'ula is greater than the distance between past, present, and future in the form of pa'ula. So you could have the act of taking in the past, the present, and the future, and the distance between lashon makar and lashon pa'ula is greater than the distance that exists between the words the way they are in past, present, and future, but the way they are in actual pa'ula. And the reason is because all three of these, when it's a pa'ula in the past, present, and future, they relate to the pa'ula, and they're talking about something of an actual pa'ula. There's an actual thing that was done. And the only difference is in terms of the time. Whereas the lashon makar is describing whatever it is that's being discussed in a way that it's removed from an actual pula. It doesn't relate to a pula at all. And therefore, in Pshuto Shel Mikra, when something is written in lashon makar, we always try to explain it with its simple meaning and not in lashon tzivui, because the meaning of lashon tzivui is that the matter must come in the form of a pa'ula. A tzivui means that it has to be done. Now, by the Zachar and Shomer that we already learned about, even though they are lashon makar, nevertheless, since we can't explain that they aren't lashon tzivui, as when we read the psukim over there, it's clearly saying a tzivui. So therefore, Rashi doesn't have to explain it to us since it's self-understood. Obviously, they are a tzivui, even though we try not to explain something which is said in lashon makar as a tzivui. But over there is no other alternative. It clearly means a tzivui. Whereas in our pasuk, we can explain lokoyach to mean lashon makar and not to mean lashon tzivui. And the pasuk is saying, when you take the sefer Torah, then there's the tzivui of a samtim. Lokoyach, not that you should take, but rather when you take, then there is the tzivui of a samtim. Now, there's another reason. This is a side point. We're going to come back to what we're saying. Really, we could go straight to the last line over here from what we just read. And therefore, it's understood why Rashi must explain that L'koyach is Lashon Tzivui and brings proofs that we find a Tzivui said in Lashon Makar. So that's really answering the second question. Why over there does Rashi not say anything? Because over there's no alternative but to explain it as a Tzivui. Why over here does Rashi have to explain it? Because over here there is an alternative. And therefore Rashi needs to tell us that we should not read it that way, but rather we should learn that it's a Tzivui just like K'mai, the examples that we find of Zachar, Shomer, and Halech. Now we'll go back to the middle part. Now there's another reason to say that L'koyach isn't Lashon Tzivui. Because Rashi taught earlier in Parshas Tavai that the Yidden complained to Moshe why he was giving Shevet Levi control over the Torah by giving them the Sefer Torah, which is what's being discussed here in these psukim. And in order to address or at least weaken this complaint of the Yidden, that would be through explaining that Vayetzav Moshe wasn't referring to L'koyach, but rather referring to V'samtem. So there's another reason over here that we have, besides that it's in the lashon of a makar, there's another reason to explain that it's not a tzivui. That we would say that Moshe wasn't telling them to take it because he didn't have a complaint against that. So rather, Moshe was just saying if there would be the taking, based on him being able to explain to the Yidden why they have nothing to worry about, then there's V'samtem. But he would weaken it. He would weaken their complaint by not having L'koyach as a command. Now, as a side point, we're going to mention another thing, and that is, and there's no place for a question, where is the place of the Sefer Torah if they don't fulfill the L'koyach? Where's the place of the Sefer Torah? We're going to say that L'koyach is just an option, and it's only if l'koyach, then there's the command of asamtem, then where's the place of the Sefer Torah? So we're saying over here there's no place for a question. Where's the place of the Sefer Torah if they don't fulfill the l'koyach? Because Rashi already taught about the complaint of the Yidden, and still Moshe gave the Sefer Torah to Shevet Levi. Right? Even though the Yidden had the complaint, Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Sefer Torah to Shevet Levi. So we must say that according to Rashi, that Moshe explained to the Yidden that there's no reason to be concerned, and therefore he was sure there would be a l'koyach. So Moshe was certain that there would be the l'koyach, so there's no question where would be the Sefer Torah. And on the other hand, even if we explain l'koyach to mean lashon tzivui, which is how we would solve the question here, where is the place of the Sefer Torah? We would solve it by saying that it's lashon tzivui, so it's for sure going to be done. There's still a question, which is, why is it in lashon makar? So we're pointing out over here, this is a side point, that there's no place for a question, where's the place of the Sefer Torah? If they don't fulfill the l'koyach, why is there no place? Because Moshe was sure that the Yidden would agree, since he explained to them why there's nothing to worry about. And on the other hand, by answering the question, where's the place of the Sefer Torah, by saying, oh, it's a lashon tzivui, you still have a question, which is, why is it in lashon makar? So either way you have a question. And more importantly, to really remove this question entirely about where is the place of the Sefer Torah, it's not a question at all. If they wouldn't take the Sefer Torah, it would obviously stay where it was until now, where this Sefer Torah was written right away, immediately after Yetzias Mitzrayim. So it would just stay on where it was until now for 40 years, since the command to write the Sefer Torah was immediately after Yetzias Mitzrayim. So these are two side points, the brackets in the next paragraph, about this point. The main thing of this answer over here is that earlier there's no need for an explanation of Rashi, because it's obvious that it's lashon tzivui, and only over here is there the possibility that it's not a tzivui. We could explain that tzivui is v'samtem, and therefore Rashi has to tell us, no, it is a lashon tzivui, k'may zachar, shamar, and holech. Now we're going to move on to answering question number 1 regarding why Rashi needs to bring 3 proofs. And we're going to break it up into 2 parts. In the first part, we're going to explain what's the weakness in each proof separately. And in the second part, we'll explain what's the weakness in each of any of the 2 proofs combined. And Rashi must bring 3 proofs, and 1 isn't enough, because the first one's zachar. So by schira, even when it refers to the pula of remembering, meaning that it's as if it says tizkar, nevertheless, it's not a pu'ula with an action. It's just remembering in a person's mind. And therefore, from the tzivui being in lashon makar by schira, it's not enough of a proof that also a tzivui regarding a pu'ula in action, that it can be said in lashon makar. So that's why schira, zachar, is not enough. Now we'll move on to shamar. So therefore, Rashi brings another proof from shamar, which refers to not doing actions. Shamar means that a person should guard himself, a person should guard oneself from doing certain actions. And nevertheless, it says the tzivui of shamar in lashon makar, and therefore we can bring a proof from there to l'koyach, which refers to an action. However, nevertheless, we can ask that also from shamar there's not a complete proof, since as Rashi taught, shmira usually means not doing a pu'ula. Shamar means that a person should guard themselves from doing, indeed it's talking about doing an action, but it's referring to a person guarding themselves from the action, to not doing the action. And since the pu'ula of shmira is through not doing a pu'ula, an action, so it makes sense for the tzivui on this thing to be in lashon makar, which also negates the whole idea of a pu'ula. Lashon makar means, we said, the way it's removed from being an action. Also shamar is telling a person not to do the action, and it's not a proof to when it's a pu'ula and an actual action, not to be guarded from the action, but to actually do an action. And that's why Rashi brings halach. But we'll see what the issue with halach is, and therefore Rashi brings a third proof from halach, which is a tzivui on a pu'ula, and it's on an actual action, not to be guarded from it, but actually the act of halach, walking with one's feet. And since it's said there in lashon makar, so it's a full proof that a tzivui may be said in lashon makar on an action. However, also from halach alone, there's not a sufficient proof, because the word halach is said as a preparation to the tzivui. Over there it says halach v'dibarta, or halach v'karasa, and therefore we can explain that it means not to literally go, but rather to mentally go, to prepare oneself mentally. Go and prepare to talk, go and speak. It means to go out of the state that you're in to speak to them, meaning that the person is going and preparing themselves to do something. And therefore Rashi doesn't suffice with the proof from Holich alone, and he also has to bring a proof from Zachar and Shamar, which aren't said as a preparation to another tzivui, so it's not referring to a mental preparation. Now, in terms of understanding this whole thing with Holich, there is a very long ha'ara from the Rebbe, ha'ara 25, that really gives more understanding, and it's referred to again later in ha'ara 26 as well, in order to fully understand the need for all three of these words of Zachar, Shomer, and Holich. Now we're going to continue in answering question number 1 by explaining why not just 2 of the proofs. If each one has a weakness, then 2 proofs should be enough. And the reason Rashi doesn't suffice with 2 of the 3 proofs is because in every 2 of the proofs, if we pick any grouping of 2, there's a sheared aspect in which they are different than Lekoyach. So let's start with the first 2, Zachar and Shomer. So both of them aren't actual actions. Zachar is a mental action. It's something which is ruchnius. It's not a physical action. And Shomer relates to not doing an action, whereas Holich is an actual action of going. Then if we combine Zachar and Holich, which we said about Holich, it could also be a mental halicha, preparation. So they are mental actions. They're things that are ruchnius. They're not gashmius. Whereas Shomer isn't a mental action, but rather refers to an actual act. It's just that it's about not doing that action, but it's referring to a physical act. And when we combine Shomer and Holich, so both of them are a preparation. A mental halicha, like we said, Holich is a preparation to do something, and so to Shmira is to be careful in order not to come to do something. So they're both in a sense, they are a preparation. And in this regard, Zachar is better since it's not a preparation. It's an actual action. It's a mental one, but it's referring to the actual action, whereas Holich is to mentally prepare oneself, and Shomer is to guard oneself, which refers to a preparation. It's about being careful not to come to do something. So there's a preparation aspect. Guard, a person is being instructed to guard themselves not to come to do something else. So it's a preparation, something to be done in order to avoid something. Whereas Zachar, even though it's talking about a mental action, but it's referring to an actual action itself and not the preparation to an action. From Yeinish Al in this Rashi, and also what we can learn for the time of Aseres Mei Tshuva, which in many years we read Parshas Vayelech on Shabbos Tshuva. We spoke many times that when a tzivui on a pu'ula is said in Lashon Makar, it indicates that the pu'ula needs to be done not just with the koyach ha'asiyah of the person, but rather also with the koyach of the makar in the nefesh, meaning from the ratzon and makar of the koyachas of the nefesh, which is higher than the koyachas ha'adam. So it means it has to be just like this word, the infinitive is the makar of the word, the way it's an action. Also in the person, it has to come not from just from the action part in the person, but also from the makar of that action. In Aseres Mei Tshuva, the makar of each person, the Yechidah Shebenefesh is shining. And Rashi hints that even though this revelation of Yechidah Shebenefesh is on a level of being a makar, which is higher than the Koychas HaAdam, nevertheless, it's a tzivui on a pu'ula. What does that mean? Meaning that it has to impact and be revealed even in the Koychas HaPratim of a person. That's what Rashi is telling us over here in Yeinish Al Torah. Even though it's Lashon Makar, it's K'may Zachar, Shomer, and Holich. It's like those words that are a tzivui of a pu'ula, this too is a tzivui on a pu'ula, meaning that the makar of the person has to be revealed and has to impact also the place of a pu'ula, which are the keiches pratim, and the details of what it has to impact are hinted to in the three things that Rashi mentions: zachar, shomer, holich. This makar has to come to zachar, it has to come to shomer, it has to come to holich. Zikaron is in the moich zikaron, which is Chochmah, which in general is Chabad. It has to come into Chabad, those keiches. Shomer is Shmiras Balev, which in general is Midas, which are in the heart. It has to come into a person's Midas, into a person's heart. And Holich is the Koyach Asiyah, which is the lowest of the Koyches HaNefesh, and in the lowest of the Koyches Asiyah themselves, because here we're talking about the feet and not the hands. So that's what it has to be. It has to go and be a tzivui, and it has to be in a person's chabad and in a person's midas, all the way down to the koyach asiyah, and within the koyach asiyah itself, all the way down to a person's feet. And Rashi is hinting with this that the idea of the revelation of the level of makar, the yechidah benefesh, what's the purpose of this revelation is in order to have an effect on all the koyches apratim in a person, starting from the higher koyches of Chabad, and also the midas in the heart, and all the way to the koyach asiyah, which is the lowest levush. Meaning that in a Aseret Tshuva, the Yechidah Nefesh must be felt in all of one's actions, starting all the way from the higher Keiches of Chochmah, Bina and Das, the Chabad, and the Midas, and all the way down to the Koyach Hasiyah and to the lowest Levush. That's where the Makar, the Yechidah Nefesh, has to be felt. Another hint that's found here, which based on this other hint, it's understood the connection between the tzivui, the specific tzivui over here of L'Koyach HaSefer HaTorah Hazeh to Shabbos Tshuva. The revelation of the level of makar, the Yechidah Benefesh, in Aseret Tshuva is in the act or in the mitzvah of Tshuva. And the Tshuva from the level of makar is Tshuva Elah. And in addition, this is also connected to Shabbos itself, because it's known that Shabbos has the same letters as Toshev, and that Shabbos is Tshuva Elah, and especially Shabbos Tshuva, which is the shleimus of the Avodah of Tshuva Elah. So we see how Shabbos Tshuva is connected to Tshuva Elah. The idea of Tshuva Elah is not Tshuva for Avonos, for Chatoim and Avonos, for Averis, but rather the Dveikis v'yichud, the attachment and the oneness and the unity of the neshama to its makar, which is through, like it says in the Zayar, yisasik b'iraisa, through learning and occupying oneself in Torah. And therefore the hint to the revelation of the level of Yechidah is in the word lekoyach in Lashon makar, as sefer HaTorah hazeh v'samtem oisem mitzad harein bris Hashem. It's in the word lekoyach that's said about as sefer HaTorah hazeh, which is the greatest level of Torah. It's talking about the Torah, the way it's in the Aron, which in Avodas Adam is the highest and most complete level of Tshuva Elah. Like we said, it's brought down from the Zayar, Yisasik Be'iraisa. That's the highest form of Tshuva Elah. And this is Nimshach also in Zachar, Shomer, and Halich, meaning in all the Keiches in Levushim, because this Tshuva Elah of Yisasik Be'iraisa has to be in all the Keiches in Levushim of a person, as the Rebbe quotes in the Sicha from Yigeres HaTshuva from the Alter Rebbe. And in each of the Levushim, and this too is hinted to in the three items, the Zachar, Shomer, and Halich, we know that there are Shivim Panim LaTorah, so it's not just referring to Chabad, the Midas, and the Maisa, like we said earlier, but we can look at each of them to referring to a different Levush. Because Zachar, it says, is Bepeh, is Dibur. Shomer, like we said earlier, is in the heart, which refers in the Levushim to Machshava, and Halich is Maisa. So we have the Levush of Dibur, the Levush of Machshava, and the Levush of Maisa. And mainly through Maisa, meaning the mitzvahs Maisis Mamish. A person becomes a Mahalach, and like Razal teach about this world, that it's Alma da Azlinon Minei, that it's in this world that a person becomes a Mahalach, and through this, it'll be V'salachti b'seichachem geimer, ve'eshber moites ulchem, va'eilech eyeschem keimemius.